Reid Duke reacts to the BNR announcement.
Next on Eternal Durdles.
Extreme thank you to all the Dirtomaniacs that support the show. If you want to get ad-free content and extra free content, you can go to patreon.com/eternaldurdles and support us. Proceeds go to editing the show, upgrading equipment, and helping us travel to events. What it do? Hello and welcome to Eternal Durdles. I'm your host, Zach Clark, and with me as always, Phil Blackman. Phil, how's it going, man?
Zach, can you believe they didn't unban Sensei's Divining Top? This is a travesty. What are we even doing here? Are we done? Are we tapping out? No, I think we have a BNR announcement. With us today is the one and only Reid Duke. Reid, before we dive in to what your take is on the BNR announcement, last time you were here, approximately a year ago, it was during Bowmaster on Bowmaster Bonanza, and we were talking about ways to tackle this meta at the time. And I brought up the card Reap, which is you rebuy cards out of your graveyard equal to the number of black permanents an opponent controls. You got such a kick out of that. You inspired me to get this beauty right here.
Oh, that is cool.
For those who can't see or listening to the audio, you got to start watching the video. This is an altered Reap that is bringing joy to Reid's eyes, and joy in Reid's eyes brings joy to mine eyes. So,
there's
Reid,
nothing I love more about playing Eternal formats than busting out like an obscure corner case type card like that. That is the pure joy, you know?
Reid, it's funny that you mentioned pulling out obscure cards because I'd like to show you this altered compost for the black metagame we're about to walk into.
There you go.
So speaking of new metagames, we just got a new BNR. Let's dive into it.
Eternal Durdles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield. Moxfield is the best Magic the Gathering deck building website on the internet. You can create, share, and find decks from Commander to Legacy and even fan-supported formats like Pre-Modern and Old School. You can see all of our decks on our Moxfield. Follow the links below to stay tuned. Yeah, go on, Phil. Go.
I was going to say the ban for Legacy was Grief, and that's it. Was that good enough? Was that enough for what we were hoping for? Was it the correct call? Reid.
Well, the key takeaway is there's always next year, Phil, for a possible Sensei's Top unbanning.
Like the Mets.
You know, they restricted Urza Saga in Vintage. They can do the same in Legacy and then give us Top.
Yeah.
Modern Horizons 12 on the way.
So banning Grief, was it enough? Good question. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of hot takes and opinions out there. And, the number one thing is like, we'll put it to the test and we'll see what people come up with, out there in the trenches. So I always like to, proceed with caution when there's a shakeup, because it's really, really difficult to predict, the second order, third order effects of banning a big card from the top deck, what's going to shake out. But I will say, going in, this is what I was afraid was going to happen. I watched all the content that you guys put out.
You heard it here.
In the last 2 weeks.
Content.
Yeah, great educational stuff. I've been talking to people. I've been monitoring the conversations. I've been playing every once in a while myself. And so the latest development that I was hearing was that some elite players were like maybe not even main decking Grief in their blue-black decks anymore. And maybe that's kind of like an inbred thing where it's, okay, Grief is slightly suboptimal in the exact mirror match, but it's really good against everything else. But anyway, the conclusion, however you want to interpret that, is the blue-black and Grixis and mono-black and whatever, these decks are still going to be really strong even without Grief. So it's always a little bit deflating when you highly anticipate a change to the format and there's a banning, and then you show up the next day and it's like, oh, I still got paired 3 out of 4 rounds against blue-black X. So that's kind of the fear here, but at least the play patterns will be different. And there's a hope that, maybe some strategies that were being held in check by the existence of Grief might have a little more play.
Reid, I know hindsight's 2020 here. Initially, this episode came about because you were one of the people we reached out to, but sort of timing missed on having you on the large "What Does Everyone Think" episode that we had. If I had gotten to you before the ban and restricted announcement, what would your picks have been?
Well, I probably would have told you, here's a category of staple cards that are played in the blue-black decks. Choose two.
Okay.
Pick your favorite two to ban. With Psychic Frog being one that lots of folks are talking about. I think you could have taken an alternative approach of banning Reanimate. People might have not been happy about that for a variety of different reasons, but this was definitely the expected. I think it would have been a bad bet to say that Grief was going to still be legal this week, and that is there's kind of two things that a banning can address, right? There's metagame imbalance and there's play patterns. So this reminds me a little bit of, remember when they banned Ragavan, however many years ago that was, three years ago, something like that? It wasn't really that Ragavan was the best card in the Delver deck or that it was unbeatable or this and that. It was more like we were all just sick of people winning the die roll and having Volcanic Island Ragavan days. Like, that play pattern was so unhealthy and unpleasant that it's like, okay, like, let's just make the format better by taking that away. And probably Grief Reanimate is in that category where even if things shake out and blue-black Psychic Frog is still the best deck, you at least get to play some Legacy. You brainstorm in your Pyroblast and you're doing this and that, as opposed to with the Grief scam draw, you just threw up your hands. It's like, okay, it didn't even matter what cards I brought today because I wasn't going to get to cast them anyway, and that's a bad feeling.
Yeah. I think there's a couple things about this ban and restricted announcement that I think are worth sort of bringing into the forefront. One is the fact that they're changing how and when the announcements happen. I'll just read that part real quick. It's clear that the timing of the June 24th ban restricted announcement was poor, so much so that we notified the public ahead of time that we would not be making any changes to Modern so that players could appropriately plan for the Pro Tour, which was certainly not ideal. Moving forward, they're going to be aligning the ban restricted announcements with the RC and RCQ seasons. So how do you feel about that as a statement?
It's a good statement.
Yeah.
I approve of that statement. I've
been somebody that actually participates in those events.
Yeah, I've played on the Pro Tour and the surrounding circuits for a long time, and I've lived through like a lot of different attempts at banning cadences, and I can never remember a time that people were happy.
Yeah.
It's always like, oh, we wanted more advance notice, or now we have the advance notice, but now we have to play with the lame cards for too long. So nothing's ever perfect. And I definitely respect that they have a tough job and they're trying to get closer to what the fans want. And I think this is a step in the right direction, but spoiler alert, it's still not going to be perfect, and there's going to be issues that come up the next time too. So
I want to just flip the coin here, because talking about like the pick two option from the blue black X decks to go talking about Reanimate. I know a lot of people have talked about Psychic Frog as an option. We are the heretics over here that are talking about getting rid of Daze. But is there anything that you thought, and also like I'm the guy who's constantly, on the front porch of WotC yelling for a Sensei's top on ban, but is there anything on the ban list that you thought would have been reasonable to come off that would have impacted Legacy? Like, of course, like there's things like Squirrel's Nest or whatever that could come off that's not really going to change the paradigm on anything. But there are a couple of cards that were in the conversation now that Psychic Frog was in the conversation of like, oh, maybe we up the power level by unloading some stuff as opposed to like hitting a target that is part of the new Days Wasteland shell as per usual. Where was your stance on that? Was that something that you would have considered a healthy option to explore? Or do you think it's cool to like leave stuff on the ban list where it is and then just add more stuff to try and get the format course corrected?
I think it's awesome if a card comes off the ban list, especially if it's a kind of a nostalgic card that people have wanted to play with. So one, and I know that your previous episode has a lot of interesting takes and suggestions about this stuff. But one that kind of stuck out to me, was it maybe Koval said unban Mind Twist, which is like that. I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea. Like I said earlier, it's really hard to predict, what's going to happen, second order, third order effects from changes to the ban list. So I'm not saying like this is a good idea, but that is the type of card that me as a longtime player, I would be like, cool, I've never played in a tournament with Mind Twist, and that's going to be a novel experience for me. So that's like an example of where they could look for a win. Like you said, like Earthcraft, Squirrel Nest, like whatever, I could take it or leave it. But I probably wouldn't build that deck if they unbanned it on day one. Somebody would, and they'd have a good time, and that's cool. But yeah, I think it's great to always re-examine and see if there's old cards to come off the ban list. You don't see them do that too often, probably for a variety of reasons. You can imagine internally it's probably hard to justify like putting resources to test a card that could be unbanned.
Not to mention reprint policies and stuff like that stop Earthcraft from coming off the ban list, I think.
Something along that same axis of putting resources to test, because obviously they don't have enough resources to test Legacy as it is, let alone test potentially making a change to come off of the ban list. Do you think that, how do you feel WotC is in terms of how aggressive they are or how conservative they are with how they approach bans? Because it seems like there was we could have seen anything ranging today from just the ban of Grief, which is what happened, to a range of 4 or 5 cards and have reasonable arguments for it, which would have been pretty aggressive. But like, where do you stand on how WotC? Do you think WotC is too conservative, too aggressive? When it comes to banning, do you think that there should be more time for course correction for the format as new sets come out, like a Modern Horizons or a Bloomburrow in recent times? What are your thoughts?
I'm just glad we're getting any attention at all, really, as Legacy and Vintage players. It probably makes sense for them to use a light touch in our case, because most of us have been around a long time. We have a tendency to be kind of like set in our ways, standing on front porches, yelling about Sensei's Divining Top, whatever it might be.
Who would do that? Who would do that?
So there's probably like the risk of going overboard is probably more in your face than the risk of not doing enough. And Legacy and Vintage are usually pretty slow. Well, relatively speaking, I should say, relatively slow to adapt and change. And so even taking one card out of the ecosystem, that might make it kind of like fun and interesting and exciting for a few months before they have a chance to reevaluate. So strategically, it makes sense to me. I wouldn't have been against a huge shakeup in the form of either bannings or unbannings, but I think this is like about probably the cadence we can expect.
I feel like they've gotten much more conservative, even speaking about unbannings, ever since they had to reban Golgari Grave Troll from Modern. They were like, yep, we've made that mistake. We're not going to get bitten again,
So maybe I can put it in perspective if you guys or some of the listeners like don't play the newer formats, but a lot of the talk on your video from last week was people going, okay, well, we're going to ban some stuff from the blue-black deck, but then we got to worry about what's going to be the next best. So are we banning up the Beanstalk? Are we banning some Eldrazi stuff? Or, this and that stuff from the Delver deck? So in Pioneer, there were basically 3 really good decks, and they banned 2 of them, leaving the Is It Phoenix deck with Treasure Cruise untouched. So it's like pretty obvious to everyone who plays Pioneer that Is It Phoenix is going to be the best deck. But that illustrates like that they are not using this predictive, what would you call it? Like getting ahead of it, preemptive bannings. It's like, okay, we're going to ban the cards that are a problem now. Then we'll see if Is It Phoenix is a problem and maybe address it the next time, but they're not trying to guess what the best of the remaining decks is going to be and hit that.
Having not touched Pioneer for a while, my guess is that they're like, yeah, that's fine. We if there's one clear deck, at least people can kind of hate it out. You know, like when there is a deck a go-to deck, at least like there's a rebalance of the meta, so people can actually decide like, oh, that's what my sideboard's going to be about.
Right. Well, so that's great. Like that usually indicates a healthy format. And there was a time prior to the whole Dimir, Scaminator era where one of the best decks was just plain old classic black-red Reanimator, right? It's a great deck. It's really scary, wins game one a lot. But it's like, if you're sick of losing to Reanimator, you could just put 7 graveyard hate cards in your sideboard. And that's good. That's a self-balancing, setup for a format that could reach an equilibrium. And Dimir Scaminator was not that. Like, that deck was too well-rounded where there was no obvious... You couldn't put 2 cards in your deck and change a bad matchup to a good matchup because they were going to take the cards away from you, they were going to counter them, they were going to have a backup plan, whatever it might be. So that's when it's scary, is when a deck is not attackable and has too many, too much resiliency, too many backup plans.
Yeah, having like a deck that is ostensibly a combo deck that also is a tempo deck at the same time was very rough to go up against.
Totally, yeah.
Given that we have come to the consensus that WotC isn't using a predictive stance because it's impossible to predict without Sense's Divining Top in the format, I actually want to be, I want to skew us towards predictive because we got EW coming up in the next couple of months across 3 weekends in North America. It's Prague again, and then in Tokyo. So Reid, a couple of questions. A, are you going to any of them? And B, what's the best deck? What are we playing, man? How do we win in this thing?
Okay, well, I am really hoping to make it to the United States one. Going to a different continent is usually a little outside my scope these days, but I think Eternal Weekend is like pretty much the most fun event on the Magic calendar, so I really hope I can make it in November. And the 2 decks that I played last year are still around. So I played Grixis Delver in Legacy, and that's a pretty reasonable pick for a top tier strategy once Grief is banned. And I played Doomsday in Vintage, which didn't even use Urza Saga anyway. So I mean, might just run it back.
Run it back.
Very few changes.
Are you going to run it back? Are you going to run Doomsday with? You didn't have 4 Ponder last year, right?
No, Doomsday is it's kind of everything's hitting just right where it can use Ponder unrestricted. It doesn't care about Urza Saga going. There's even you could play Psychic Frog in Doomsday, either main deck or sideboard if you want to do that. So it's a good time to be a combo player.
And then speaking of Psychic Frog, if we run back Grixis Delver, what is the new? I got these cards, man. I got these 2 altered green cards that I have to bring in against these black decks. What is the new? Where would you start post ban going into this format? Let's say you were going to play some Legacy tonight, and you're bringing Grixis Delver. What's your spread of threats at this point? Are you on full scope of Delver? Are you moving away and playing both Bowmaster and Psychic Frog? Are you playing like the full suite of both? Are you playing a hedge of a combination between them across the 75, depending on the matchup? Where's your head at?
It's a good question. The last time I played was, I don't know. Well, the last time I played an event with Grixis Delver was 5 or 6 or more weeks ago, and I didn't play Psychic Frog, which in retrospect was a pretty bad error. But I am a huge fan of Dragon's Rage Channeler. I'm a huge fan of Bowmasters. Delver is, not what it used to be, but I still do value being able to get on the board for 1 mana. I mean, that's really like the thing that I like about Delver in Legacy is that all your cards cost 0 or enough of your cards cost 0 or 1 mana that you can get an advantage in that way, or not be too sad if you lose the die roll, whatever it might be. So yeah, something's got to go to make room for Frog, but I'm still a big believer in Orcish Bowmasters. When I was learning Grixis Delver, it was like there was Grixis and there was Teamer, and nobody really knew what was better. And I was like, okay, I'm going to play a few matches with Grixis, and if Orcish Bowmasters doesn't really impress me, then I'm going to switch to Teamer. And then within 3 matches, I was like, okay, this card is just so busted. There's no way I'm registering a deck without it.
How do you feel about Nethergoyf as another one?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, I mean, I would like to try that. It lacks the special power of being blue, which is one of the things that, structurally makes Delver really good in that deck. Is it's like, hey, if you have to have a weakest or most situational card, at least, you could staple it to your Force of Will in the late game, and that works. But Nethergoyf, I'm sure, has a place, and especially if it's like a lot of blue-red X decks, then having something with greater than 3 toughness is cool.
That was my go-to thought when I thought that I was 100% on the board of like Bowmasters is going. So I was like 12 1-drop deck. Like give me Bowmasters, Dragon's Rage Chandlers, Nethergoyfs, and Psychic Frog, and let's just jam.
So you thought that was your prediction, Zach? Was it was going to be Bowmasters and
I thought it would be a little wider than Bowmasters and Grief. I was going for I think 5 cards with what I wanted. What I thought was they would do Bowmasters and Grief. And I'm somewhat surprised that Bowmasters is still in the meta just after they've talked about it so much, and it still has sort of that same share. But yeah, I figured it would go. So I thought like I got my set of Nethergoyfs, so I'm ready. In the event that something happens. I don't think any emergency bans are going to happen between now and Eternal Weekend, and the next ban is going to be after Eternal Weekend. So we can take heart in knowing that what we're getting for those tournaments it will be what's going to be played in those tournaments.
Reid, in your opinion, because when you were like, I played Bowmaster instead of Psychic Frog and think that was a mistake, a lot of the people that we had on the cast last episode and, the goings on after the ban announcement today, where it was only Grief, have really had a keen eye on Psychic Frog as a card with a target on its head. Where are you on Psychic Frog? Are you in the same space as those people who want it gone, or are you thinking that it's just, the new toy that people have to adjust to?
I actually don't have that many reps with it, so it's possible that it's like even better than I'm envisioning. I think the analogy to Dreadhorde Arcanist is a pretty good one, where it's like, okay, 2 mana card that if it gets to survive an attack, you're probably winning the game a disproportionate amount of the time. It's hard to kill with removal. The saving grace, and this is almost weird to say a saving grace, is it can get pyroblasted, but that invites another question of like, do we want to go down the path of being back to people main decking multiple pyroblasts? Like, is that a healthy format? But that I guess to put that a different way, a card like Psychic Frog would be really oppressive in that it survives all the red-based removal, but at least red has the other weapon against it in Pyroblast. So, it's like black gets Fatal Push, white gets Swords to Plowshares, and all the other stuff. So there are a variety of weapons to fight it. So I'm hoping it just shakes out to be like, this is the premier threat, but people have weapons against it instead of, just being super dominant.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people called out for Uro back in the day, and now it's like one of those cards that you're just like, this is part of the meta.
I'm still calling for it, man. It's fine. I get it out of here. That's what's it do. Reid, I have a question based on like you just reminded me of the times where when Pyroblast is main deckable, that it's the sign of a skewed format, and I'm curious as to the Fatal Push caring about CMC 4 or less if it's revolted, or 2 or less. That the something like CMCs is not heralded as this is a sign of a bad format, the way that Pyroblast caring about a specific color is. And I'm curious if you think that are you of the mind that if Pyroblast were main decked, that's the sign of a skewed format as opposed to just it's another piece of removal that cares about a condition the same way that Fatal Push does?
Good question. I don't have I wouldn't say it's a deal breaker for me. I wouldn't be like, oh, I'm staying home and skipping the Legacy tournament because there's too many Pyroblasts. But certainly in an idealistic, like utopian world, all 5 colors would be represented and people would be able to play whatever deck and strategy they want. And if you're seeing, I mean, look, thinking back on the times that I've played main deck Pyroblasts, it's like almost like a hubris thing where it's like, hey, if somebody's playing a non-blue deck, I'm just going to beat them anyway. And that's not healthy.
Spoken
right?
like a Jund player.
Well, yeah, like
enough cards in your deck
remember,
for 2 cards anyhow, right?
Yeah, the worst was when Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise were legal, where it's like, okay, yeah, if you're playing white-green creature deck, I'll have these dead cards, but I'm just going to draw 7 more cards than you, and it won't even matter.
Oh, Stress Daddy and Dooms are going to get in the comments. They're getting in there.
Yeah, I'm going to be I'm sure I'm going to receive like death challenges to play 2014 Legacy against people's non-blue decks here, but
none of the Reliquary players are losing their minds.
Yeah.
Well, they have to make it to the like X and 2 round first. You know?
Got him. Go ahead, Zach.
So the other thing that I wanted to discuss about this announcement is how did you feel about the legacy part of the announcement, the information that they gave us sort of behind the scenes?
Could you put that in context? Like what specifically are you asking about?
Yeah. So so in comparison, we got a lot of information about Nadu in the Modern, a little bit of behind the scenes information about Grief and about Nadu and how they felt about the One Ring. You know, they really went into detail. It even talked about Necro Dominance and Psychic Frog, right? Here, they touch on the concept of talking about Psychic Frog a lot, but they, in my opinion, they didn't go far enough to give us sort of their, they didn't do enough fan service is what I'm getting at. I think they needed to say, hey, Legacy players, we're thinking about you a little bit, instead of just like, here's 4 paragraphs, please leave us alone.
Yeah. Of course, I would like more attention because I love Legacy. I'm really passionate about it. I think we'll all be kind of in a like healthier mindset state if we make peace with the fact that we have to be like pretty self-sufficient.
Yeah.
Like that, you know, like I said earlier, I'm thrilled that we got any attention at all. And there's so many formats now, and especially that Legacy is not represented on like the Pro Tour, RCQ, regional championship stage. They're probably just not going to be super like active or heavy-handed, similar to in the way that they will be with the other formats. So, yeah, I would say it would be nice to have more written and more data and more thoughtfulness, but this is kind of in line with what I expected and not losing any sleep over it.
Yeah, I think that's the reasonable take is we can't lose any sleep over it. I think like the thing that I got hung up on was where the line where they say, and talked a lot about Psychic Frog, but then didn't delve into any details about what that talk was about or what was the talk that they were considering in that, giving just like a couple of bullets of like what, when you say you talk, when you lend yourself a card, you know that like we as a community are going to go, okay, well, we were talking about that card. What were you talking about? Were you having similar conversations to what we were having? Like a little bit of insight there. But like, yeah, after the consistency of how they've done these announcements, I am also of the mind that like the fact that they are taking any amount of time is more than they actually have to, because they could just tell us to, you know,
they could just say Grief is banned.
Yeah, and then they could like literally the entire ban announcement, like after all these things where it's like we can go on Twitter and get angry that Sensei's Divining Top is not where it should be, but like at the end of the day, like they could just write Grief is banned, and then in the actual section where they talk about the format could just say figure it out.
Yeah, sure.
Right?
I mean,
yeah. I mean, it wouldn't be great, but that's like ultimately they could, and we would get the same amount of information that we got here.
Reid, curveball for you here. You mentioned, you know, you were happy that we received any attention. How do you feel? I'm going to put you on the spot here. How do you feel about a Legacy community panel in the realm of something like the Pauper community panel?
I would say I'm open to it. You know, no strong opinion. Yeah, it's that seems like a model that has worked for other formats. So
we can clearly see that it's working for Pauper. They didn't even have anything on this list to talk about.
Yeah, like if Legacy is, if we're accepting that it's fully divorced from Wizards' organized play network and not touching the Pro Tour or the regional championship or, you know, some kind of future Grand Prix equivalent circuit. I actually, the name of the new one is escaping me right now.
Super Series?
Spotlight Series.
Spotlight Series. Yep, Spotlight
yeah.
Series. So anyway, if it's like not a Wizards format and they just want to say, hey, look, we can't give this proper attention, like we're going to hand it off to the community to manage it. That seems like it could be a logically consistent decision.
Logistics behind that notwithstanding.
they have had legacy tie-ins to the Pro Tour in the past,
yeah.
You know, as recently as 2018 or so. So I maybe naively am not fully giving up hope on that. In which case it probably makes more sense to have a formalized, you know, WotC oversight ban list. But yeah, I'm open to
on this 3 years before we get some sort of Spotlight Series that includes Legacy as a possible thing.
Over under 3 years.
Over under 3 years.
That's probably pretty good line. I was gonna say probably nothing in year one, but I'll you know, naive and optimistic. I'm nothing if not naive and optimistic. So I'll say yes.
Okay, he goes under.
We're going under. Zach, you can be old man yelling at clouds. Me and Reid are going to be the young strapping lads going under.
I actually will say that I think it's under because what I think they're going to do is they're going to do a Spotlight Series teams, and that will be the thing that they will shoehorn in Legacy as like, oh yeah, you can do it with your friends, but we're really focusing on Pioneer and Modern or something, or Standard in this, you know, like that would be my guess.
That'd be
how
awesome.
That got in.
One thing I'm very interested in now that we've had a couple of hours with Grief being banned.
This brave new world that we now live in.
Brave new world of knowing that you're not going to be forcibly mulled to 5 every game.
The format's already solved.
I'm curious. Like, you know, I'm putting my deck together right after we get off the call. I'm going to finish putting my deck together to play Monday Night Magic Legacy in this brand new world. And I suddenly, even though there's still a lot of potential problems that, you know, we've been talking about that we'll have to figure out in this new era before Eternal Weekend, I am like a lot more excited to play tonight and Terminus people than I've been in quite some time. And so I'm curious for both of you guys, now that like we've settled with Grief is gone, what excites you most about Legacy right now? What cards to play? What decks maybe come back out of the woodwork because Grief is gone? So like there's new spots for like how to attack the potential metagame, or the fact that like these blue-black X decks no longer have 4 new slots to figure out what cards to toy with and how that's going to create a ripple effect. I'm just curious, like, where's your head at? Are you guys excited for anything?
I've got a good answer, and I bet I could give you 100 guesses, and you would not get my answer. But the first thing that jumped to my mind,
people with me,
High Tide.
I was like, okay.
You know, like I became interested in High Tide when they unbanned Mind's Desire, and that's like a super fun deck. Not a particularly fun deck to be like tier 1 or like the most popular deck, but it's fun to see it out there every once in a while. You know, talking about niche old cards.
You have you put the biggest smile on Marcus's face if he's listening. You're like, oh yeah, High Tide is the nut, and then you're like, but like tier 2, and then his
wah, wah.
Well, let's let that be a symbolic answer for any deck where you're like, okay, this is never going to be the best deck, but it's fun, and maybe I can justify it at like a local store level. But you were never justifying that when people were double griefing you.
No,
you know,
no.
Like it's like some kind of deck that requires setup, or you have to sculpt a hand, or you have to have some kind of expensive card, you know, to resolve in the mid game. Like it was just not, you know, you couldn't even fool yourself that you were going to be able to get away with that when grief was legal. But I think there's a lot of room for combo. There's a lot of room for kind of cool synergies and interactions that Grief was putting a hard stop on.
I have two answers to this. Yeah.
Implicit before you jump in, Zach, is the unbanning of synergy is interesting.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. My two answers are, so I think I might experiment a little bit with Teamer Delver. Go like, Stifle Wasteland Days route. Play questing Druid, of course. So that's an option for me. But I think give it a couple weeks, and I think a deck that will actually be interesting to check out, because the sideboard slots would have cleared back up, is playing like Blue Dredge, like the Mafuz Van Gogh, like Blue Dredge deck, because we're losing those slots that people, by default, we're just throwing in against those Reanimator decks. Now we'll see how the meta shakes out, and if Reanimator still becomes like the tier 1 deck, then maybe people have to keep those in. But if you get that, you're going to be able to get some people on like a deck like that.
Yeah, for sure.
So we got High Tide. So Reid, are you talking about like you want to try out High Tide and are excited about it in like casual play, or is that kind of combo deck something that you would legitimately consider for an event like EW?
Well, there's a burden of proof that I would have to actually get out there and win some games with it before I would register it for a big tournament. But a general concept of competitive Magic, at least the way I organize my own thoughts, is if you're really trying your hardest to win, that's one thing, and you're going to choose one category of decks. But if you want to be like 95% competitive, like, hey, I showed up to Monday Night Legacy and I went 3-1, like that's a cool, fun experience, and you could try a pretty wide range of strategies to be able to get there. So that's kind of the area where I'm looking for like health and diversity is, can I at least justify it in the second highest level of competition, where
is it worth wasting a Monday night over?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Can I take some games off of the top decks, even if I'm not better than 50-50?
And then in that vein, I have one last question that I want to ask about. It's a pressing thing that we've all wanting to know. A two-sided question. What type of deck are you most happy to play against from an experience standpoint? And which decks currently in the format are you the least happy to play against? And I asked that through the lens of everybody who sat down and got double griefed. It's not necessarily that grief was too good, but it's that the experience was miserable. And so I'm curious to know where is your spectrum of like your I'm going to have so much fun playing this matchup versus I'm going to have so little fun playing this matchup that currently exists.
It's a great question. So the number one factor is diversity is king. Like that's the reason that you play Legacy, is to have a diversity of experiences. Games can end on turn 1, or they can go to turn 22, and you win with Entreat the Angels or something like that.
My man.
And then the number 2 is generally you want a larger share of your experiences to be such that you felt your decisions mattered. So like, okay, I got double griefed again. Didn't matter what cards I brought. Like, I lose, good game. Or, I got wastelanded or chaliced or blood mooned, and I only got to play one spell this game. Those are the types of experiences. If you have them over and over and over again, it's very discouraging and not fun. It's good to have that stuff in the format and experience it once in a while. I have to worry about it. But, more I'm looking to play a game where it's like, I played a few turns, my decisions mattered, what card I kept with my ponder, how I attacked and blocked, what I chose to play my removal spell on. So in that, it's like kind of the mid-range versus mid-range versus control, aggro versus mid-range, all those categories of matchups fit that bill. And then even like how we talked about Black-Red Reanimator, sometimes you show up and you lose to Reanimator and you're like, yeah, that's on me. I didn't respect the deck enough. I didn't bring my surgical extractions or my ley line of the void. So now I know next time I can structure my deck to be prepared. I can make a different decision to have a different result. And that's the key. That's the key to good gaming is like, I want to know that I can make a different decision to have a different result. So that was a pretty long-winded answer, but those are kind of the things that I'm looking for in my legacy experiences.
I was lying when I said I had no more questions. I have one more because your talk of diversity, your talk of diversity and a range of experiences inspired another question. Because it made me think of conversations that I've had with a couple of people since the banning earlier today, and talking about like what cards weren't really ever explored or haven't been explored all that much because we just were under the presumption that like grief was what you were going to run into 50% of the time. And the card that came up was Pest Control as a card that is just like extremely underexplored. Like nobody's ever seen this card cast in Legacy, which seems weird because it seems like a card that would fit our style of where the format is, just a 2-mana sweeper for cheap stuff. Is there any cards that come to mind for you, Reid, that you think are very much underexplored besides Reap and Compost?
There's some cool stuff out there for sure. Yeah, Pest Control, and now I put Wrath of the Skies in the same category as like those read as, you know, if you, across the whole span of Legacy's lifespan, those would read as really strong, appealing cards, but they probably just weren't really that good, you know, in a world of grief and Troll of Khazad-dûm and turn 1 Atraxa, or, you know, turn 2 Atraxa. I'm sure there's a lot more, you know, like I said, Mind's Desire was unbanned recently. There's cool stuff going on with Beseech the Mirror and like a million different ways you can build Storm right now. I didn't prepare an answer for that question, so I'm sure there's a lot that will come to me after we hang up the call. There's definitely a lot of stuff that's being held in check by Orcish Bowmasters, you know, namely like every 1 toughness creature ever printed, and a lot of card drawing engines and stuff like that. So that's an example of a card that's maybe stifling creative deck building a bit. But
I know the card we talked about last time you run, which was almost exactly a year ago, about 15 days since the last time you were on, was I think Dread Moss Knight was a card that we were talking about.
Oh yeah, Mosswood Dread Knight from Wilds of Eldraine. Yep. Yeah, I mean there's a lot of talk about that concept of like if you're willing to be 95% competitive, there's a lot of cool stuff that you can bring. There's a lot of really powerful, interesting creatures in the 1 to 3 mana range that, you know, you could try out and mix in a couple copies in your mid-range deck. I actually have a pet card right now. It's Carnage Interpreter. You guys know this one?
No.
It's
Benucci's going to get so upset at us for not memorizing every card.
It's from the Karlov Manor supplemental like Clue product.
Oh my gosh!
And it's
is this the thing where you discard your hand?
2 red or black hybrid. You discard your hand. You make 4 clues, and I like that as like I sideboarded in as like I'm going to trade off resources in the mid-range matchup and then drop the hammer as the last card in my hand, get the 4 clues, rebuild from there. And then I think it's really cool in particular that you can, in Grixis Delver, every land casts it, and you can play it under a Blood Moon. So if somebody's like, I'm going to lock Reid out of playing spells, you know, at least you can get them with a 5/5 menace that draws 4 cards.
See, this is where I know where you and I land in this post-grief world, because you're excited about Carnage Interpreter making a bunch of clues, and I'm over here trying to cast Tameo Meets the Story Circle to make a bunch of clues.
But that's the point. That's what's fun is when everyone can dream and everyone can bring the strategy that's fun for them. And that's what that's trying to move towards.
That's kind of a perfect point to end the show on, is like when brewing can happen, right? And now we live in that world where like brewing can kind of happen again. Yeah, Reid, it was awesome having you on. We really appreciate it. It's always a blast having you pop onto the show, especially for an episode like this.
Reid,
For
during
sure.
your outro, can you confirm that when you sleeve up your deck and play Legacy again, that the Singleton Colligan's command will be there?
Oh yeah. Singleton Colligan's command. Blow up that Chalice of the Void when you need it. But yeah, thank you guys for inviting me. Like I said, I've been listening, and sorry I couldn't make it for the pre-banning show, but I appreciate you giving me another invite. And
well, this is just as good, if not better.
For sure. Yeah. It was great talking about Legacy, and happy gaming to everybody who's excited to play again. I know I am.
Awesome. Catch you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Before you go, I need some help. Please subscribe to this channel and do your part to help sustain the Legacy content ecosystem. Just subscribe to this channel goes a long way to reminding YouTube that people love and support this format. Now, if you really want to go the extra mile, you should think about supporting us through Patreon. Both the links for subscription and Patreon are right here. And if you're listening on an audio format, you can go to patreon.com/eternaldurdles. Thanks so much for watching.